My name is Cameron Blake. I'm 34 years old, and just last week, I stood on the rooftop of an eco tower I helped design in San Francisco. The next day, I was standing in the rain on the steps of my father's old Victorian estate in Fairhaven, Vermont. Uninvited, unwelcome, and very much underestimated. It started with a call I never thought I'd get. "Cam, it's Mara. I'm sorry it's your dad. He passed last night." I remember the sting in her voice, how it cracked, in the way only someone who still cared could. 5 years. That's how long it had been since I'd spoken to my father. Since the argument that detonated everything we'd built together. Since I walked away from Blake Development Group and from Fairhaven itself. The last thing I wanted was to return. But something in Mara's voice, an ache mixed with urgency, reached past my pride. She told me Elaine, my stepmother, was already making moves. I didn't ask what she meant. I knew. Elaine always moved fast when she smelled opportunity. Before I can continue my story, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there. I'd love to know. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. My father, Thomas Blake, was the kind of man who created an image and made it real. In Fairhaven, we were seen as the perfect family. He was the visionary developer, she was the elegant socialite. To the outside world, the Blakes hosted charity galas and funded school programs. Inside that house, it was something else entirely. When he married Elaine, I was 13. She was polished, poised, and just enough older than me to wield control without ever lifting her voice. Her children, Whitney and Jake, slid into the family like puzzle pieces she forced into place. One by one, my childhood rituals disappeared. The Sunday river walks, the blueprint sketches in the breakfast nook. Our traditions were traded for cocktail hours and curated smiles. Back then, I stayed quiet. I thought keeping the peace would earn me a place. But some things, no matter how silent you are, have a way of breaking through. My father stopped asking for my opinion. Elaine started calling our firm the family business, even though her kids had never set foot on a construction site. And 5 years ago, when I returned from a sustainable housing tour in Norway, to find that the Riverbend Commons project, the one my father and I had drafted together, had been overhauled into luxury condos, I finally broke. "You promised this would serve the whole town," I'd told him, "not just the rich." "I changed the plan," he said flatly. "Elaine has a vision for the area." That was it. I left. No screaming, no ultimatums. Just packed my things and flew to California, where I rebuilt myself from scratch. Where people didn't see me as Thomas Blake's disappointment. Now, with a single phone call, I was being pulled back. Not as a son, not even as a guest. Just an obstacle Elaine hadn't expected to show up. The Blake estate sat at the top of Crescent Hill, like a crown on a brittle queen, still grand, still imposing, but no longer warm. As my rental car rolled up the familiar gravel path, the stone lions at the gate seemed smaller than I remembered, like so much of my past. Elaine's white Range Rover was parked beside a sleek black BMW I didn't recognize. Probably Jake's. The house glowed with curated morning soft lights, behind drawn curtains, a discreet floral wreath on the door, jazz, trickling out from the foyer, like a polite apology. I rang the bell knowing full well I wasn't expected. The door opened with an efficiency I'd forgotten. Whitney stood there, sharp black sheath dress phone in one hand, a champagne flute in the other. Her face was composed perfectly so, like she'd practiced it. "Cameron," she said, voice clipped. "We didn't know you were coming." "He was my father," I said. She didn't step aside. Not immediately. Just held my gaze for a beat too long, before moving wordlessly to let me in. Inside, the smell of lilies and lemon polish fought for dominance. The warmth I remembered, the scent of cedar, the hum of my father's old turntable was gone. Elaine was holding court in the living room, surrounded by half the Fairhaven Women's Foundation, and Victor Langford, of all people, a development shark with the soul of a spreadsheet. My stomach dropped. She was already making moves. When she saw me, her expression faltered just a flicker. Then she was up arms wide like we were long-lost friends. "Cameron, darling, what a surprise. We tried reaching you, but I suppose numbers change." "They don't," I replied. "I got the message from Mara. Elaine's eyes hardened for just a second before her face reset into concern. Well, I'm so sorry for your loss. I know things were tense, but he loved you. Truly. I gave her a tight nod. I didn't come here for a performance. Your old room is being used for inventory, she added, but we can make up the guest room in the east wing. I wanted to ask inventory of what part of my childhood, was now boxed and labeled, but I let it go. This wasn't the time. Jake didn't bother to get up. He was sprawled in one of my dad's old leather armchairs, scrolling his phone like none of this mattered. And maybe it didn't to him. Jake never wanted a legacy, he just wanted the lifestyle. Elaine's voice followed me as I moved to head upstairs. David Penrose will be here in the morning to discuss some paperwork. A small family gathering. I'm sure you understand. Family! That word again. She wielded it like a blade, always just dull enough to draw blood without anyone noticing. I didn't respond. I just climbed the stairs, suitcase in hand, the silence ringing louder than any welcome could have. In the guest room, minimalist, impersonal, I sat on the edge of the bed and let the weight of it settle. 5 years of distance, and here I was, already being cut out of the picture like I never mattered. But this wasn't over. Not even close. Sleep didn't come easy that night. The bed was too firm, the air too still, the room too perfectly curated to feel real. Around midnight, I gave up trying. I got dressed and crept downstairs, the old wooden steps barely creaking under my feet. Fairhaven was blanketed in mist, the kind that rolls off the river and settles like a secret. I stepped out onto the back patio, instinctively drawn to the garden beyond it. My mother's garden, before Elaine took over and replaced everything with boxwoods and hardscape lighting. The stone bench beneath the maple tree was still there, though the tree had thinned with age. I sat there for a long time, staring at the silhouette of the house against the fog, trying to remember how it had felt to belong here. The library window was cracked open, just enough for voices to drift out. Once David confirms the will, we'll move forward with the Langford deal, Elaine was saying. Cameron's not going to like that, Jake said lazily. Elaine's laugh floated out like a champagne cork. What can he do? Thomas left everything to us. He made his choice when he walked away. I stood up before I even realized I had. My fists clenched, heart pounding. I wanted to storm in right then and there, but I didn't. Not yet. My father always said timing wins wars, not rage. Back inside, I wandered until I found myself standing in front of my father's study. The door was locked, just as Mara had said, but I remembered the loose floorboard in the hall, the one he used to keep an emergency key under. I pried it up, and there it was. The room had been stripped of everything personal. Bookshelves emptied, maps gone. The old drafting table replaced with a sleek glass desk. The air still carried the faint trace of his cologne, sandalwood, and citrus, but just barely. Then I saw it. A painting of the Fairhaven River, the one Dad had bought from a local artist and hung over the fireplace decades ago. I took it down, heart racing. On the back, taped with careful precision, was a tiny silver key and a note. If you found this, you're not done yet. Box 319, First National Bank. I exhaled a sharp, shaky breath. My father might have shut me out in life, but in death, he was talking. And maybe, just maybe, he'd left more than memories behind. As I slipped the painting back into place, a voice behind me made me flinch. You're not supposed to be in here. Whitney. She was standing in the doorway, arms crossed. This was Dad's office, I said. Was being the key word, she said softer than I expected. Mom had it cleared out last week. I tucked the key into my pocket, measuring my words. Why so fast? Whitney shrugged, but there was something behind her eyes. Something unreadable. Mom says it was time to move on. Some spaces don't belong to ghosts. I wanted to say he wasn't a ghost to me. But I let her go. There would be time for that later. Tonight I had a key, and tomorrow I had a plan. First National Bank opened at 9. I was parked across the street by 8:15, sipping burnt coffee from a corner bodega, and watching the clouds hang low over downtown Fairhaven like they were holding their breath. When the manager unlocked the doors, I was the first one inside. Box 319 wasn't anything special to look at, just a brushed steel rectangle in the middle of a wall of brushed steel rectangles. But the weight of it in my hands felt like fate. Inside was a leather-bound folder and a flash drive. Nothing else. I drove to the only place in town I knew still had private booths, with working outlets the library. Sitting in the back corner, surrounded by dusty encyclopedias and a wall clock that ticked too loudly, I plugged in the drive and opened the only file on it, for Cameron. Confidential. The screen lit up with my father's face. Thinner than I remembered, paler, but his eyes were steady. "If you're watching this," he began, "then you found the key and I'm gone." I swallowed hard. His voice cracked on that last word just barely, but I heard it. "I owe you an apology," he continued. "I let Elaine drive a wedge between us. I let my pride, my fear, and my guilt keep me from reaching out. That was a mistake I've tried to correct in the only way I know how." He went on to explain how in the last 3 years of his life, he'd slowly and quietly transferred key assets of Blake Development Group into a new entity, Blake Legacy Holdings, with me as the sole owner. Riverbend Commons, the Market Row block, the Lowry Apartments. Nearly half the company's most strategic real estate was already in my name. "Elaine thinks she's inheriting an empire," he said. "But the truth is, the empire's already moved." I sat back stunned. He described working with his old business partner, Samuel Greer, to legally isolate the transfers from Elaine's reach. I couldn't leave it to chance. I needed to make sure the vision we had for this town lived on, even if I didn't. He paused, then looked straight into the lens. "You were right, Cam. About Riverbend. About the people. About what Fairhaven could be. I was too tired to fight Elaine then. But I'm asking you to fight now." The video ended with him saying something I hadn't heard in years. "I'm proud of you, and I love you. Finish what we started." I didn't realize I was crying until I saw the tear hit the keyboard. The folder held every legal document to back it up. Signed deeds, time-stamped transfers, even the articles of incorporation for Blake Legacy Holdings. It wasn't just sentiment, it was a strategy, a perfect patient ironclad plan. And suddenly, I saw it for what it was. My father's final act wasn't silence, it was legacy. As I packed up the documents, one thing became crystal clear: Elaine was about to have the worst surprise of her life. David Penrose's office occupied the top floor of an old red brick building on Main Street, one of the first my father ever developed. As I stepped into the paneled lobby with its oil paintings and the scent of old paper, I wondered if Penrose even realized he was now technically leasing space from me. I arrived 10 minutes early. Elaine arrived 10 minutes late, her heels clicking against the hardwood like war drums. Jake was with her, dressed like he was going clubbing after, and Whitney followed silently, her face unreadable. Cameron, Elaine said coolly as she breezed past me. "How bold of you to attend. This meeting is for family, you understand." "I do," I replied, opening my briefcase and laying out a neat stack of documents on the polished oak table. "That's why I'm here." David looked like he'd swallowed a paperclip. He fidgeted with his tie and cleared his throat. "Let's begin." The reading was formal, dry, like someone trying to suck emotion out of death. My father's will was brief, direct. "To my wife, Elaine Blake, I leave the family home on Crescent Hill and the balance of our shared accounts. To my stepchildren, Jake and Whitney Winters, I leave designated funds and personal items of sentimental value." Elaine's smile tightened but held. David continued. "And to my son, Cameron Blake, I leave all business interests pertaining to Blake Development Group, with full executive control and associated rights." Elaine blinked. "Excuse me," David faltered. "There was an addendum, filed 6 months ago. It reversed the previous version, granting Cameron full ownership." "That's impossible," Elaine said, rising from her chair. "He changed it. I was there." I took my time, reached into my briefcase, pulled out the deeds one by one, and spread them across the table. Riverbend Commons, Market Row, Lowry Apartments, Block 14B, the entire strategic backbone of Blake Development. My name stamped in bold on every page. "These aren't part of the estate," I said calmly. "They were transferred during his lifetime. Independently. Legally." Jake leaned forward. "You forged these." "They're notarized," I replied. "Filed with the county. Validated by Samuel Greer and his legal team. Want to call them?" Elaine snatched one and scanned it, her hands trembling. David confirmed it softly. "They're legitimate. If Thomas transferred these properties before his death, they don't fall under the will. But the company Elaine started is now an empty shell," I said. "The real assets were moved to Blake Legacy Holdings 2 years ago. I'm the sole director." For a moment, no one spoke. Just the tick of Penrose's grandfather clock. Whitney looked at me. Did he plan all of this? I nodded, every step. Elaine stood slowly. You think this means you've won, that you can just walk back into town and take everything? I'm not taking anything I said. I'm honoring what Dad built, what he wanted. Jake shoved his chair back and stormed out. Elaine stared at me, hatred flaring behind her eyes. I'll contest this, she hissed. Everything. You'll regret this. I leaned forward, voice steady. You're welcome to try. But if you do every video my father recorded about you, your deals with Langford, your attempts to isolate him go public. Are you ready for that? She didn't respond. Just turned on her heel and left. David let out a breath. Well, he said. That was unexpected. But for me, it was exactly the outcome I came for. The next morning, I walked into the downtown office of Blake Development Group, not as a visitor, not as a disgraced son, but as its new head. Marjorie Kent, my father's assistant for over 20 years, was waiting just inside the glass double doors. Her eyes welled up the moment she saw me. Tom would have loved to see you walk back in like this, she said, enveloping me in a hug that smelled like lavender and printer toner. The office looked different, sleeker, colder. Gone were the framed town maps, the faded photos of construction crews in muddy boots. In their place were modern abstract prints and a wall-mounted digital welcome board displaying Winter Group Consulting, interim management. Elaine had been fast. Marjorie walked me through everything. Elaine brought in Langford's people 6 months ago. Started streamlining. Let go of 3 senior project managers. Shifted the Riverbend development to a luxury spec. My stomach turned. What happened to the original blueprints? I saved them, she said, leading me to a back filing room she had commandeered as her personal archive. She handed me a thick folder marked RB, Original. My father's handwritten notes were still in the margins. Community housing, Riverwalk access, local business priority. It was all there, scratched through, post-it noted, but intact. They've already started rezoning requests with the council, she said grimly. Victor Langford's offering tax incentives if the town signs off. It was worse than I thought. Elaine hadn't just been stripping assets, she had been re-engineering the soul of the company. One bad quarter away from selling Riverbend to Langford outright. I moved through the rest of the offices, like a ghost absorbing what had been changed. My father's old office had been converted into a meeting pod. His oak desk replaced with a modular table on wheels. The smell of him coffee-seater ambition was gone. But not everything had been erased. When I opened the shared drive on Marjorie's computer, I found a private folder labeled CB. It contained emails between my father and Samuel Greer detailing the slow transition to Blake Legacy Holdings. There were spreadsheets updated quarterly, forecasts, contingency plans, a clear roadmap meant for my eyes only. He had never stopped building. He had just stopped explaining. I looked up at Marjorie, her face lined with worry. How much time do we have before Langford forces a vote? I asked. 3 weeks, maybe less, she said. He's been courting the city council using Elaine's name to grease the wheels. I nodded. Then we fight this from the inside. No more shadows. That afternoon, I met with the remaining staff. Some loyal, some wary, some clearly on Langford's payroll. I told them the truth. I told them about my father's vision, his regret, the future he wanted for Fairhaven. A few smiled. A few scoffed, but they listened. Later that night, I sat alone in the dark conference room blueprint spread across the table, tracing the river line with my fingers. I wasn't just preserving my father's work, I was correcting his final mistake. He'd tried to save the company without confronting the people ruining it. I wouldn't make the same error. By the end of the week, the walls were shifting. Some employees who'd kept their heads down under Elaine's regime began to poke them up again. A few even thanked me quietly in the elevator or dropped off files with helpful post-its details Elaine would have deleted. But the most unexpected change came from Whitney. She showed up at my office late one afternoon, still dressed like a Fairhaven socialite, but without the usual mask of indifference. She closed the door behind her and stood with arms folded, eyes flickering with something close to guilt. I went through some of Mom's boxes, she said. After the will reading, I waited. She packed up Dad's journals, said they were just clutter. Her voice caught slightly. But I found one from last year. She pulled it from her tote, a black leather-bound book I recognized instantly. My father's handwriting on the cover, Riverbend 2023. Inside were pages of notes. Real ones. Frustrated ones. Reflections on the mistakes he'd made, the pressure Elaine had put on him, and his fear that Jake wasn't ready or even willing to lead. You were always the one with vision, Whitney read aloud from one page. I just couldn't see past the disappointment of our last argument to tell you. Why are you giving me this? I asked quietly. She hesitated. Because I think Mom manipulated all of us. I wanted a family. She wanted control. Her words lingered with me even after she left. She wasn't a hero, not yet. But something was shifting. Later that evening, I got a call from a blocked number. Cameron Blake, the voice was female, steady, curious. Yes. My name is Rachel Thornton. I believe we share a father. I sat up straighter. What? My mother and Thomas had a brief relationship in the 80s. I didn't know about him until I was an adult. We reconnected a few years ago, quietly, at my request. Why now? Because Elaine kept me out of the funeral. But I wanted to meet you. I think your father wanted that too. We agreed to meet at the Fairhaven Historical Society neutral ground. Rachel was nothing like Whitney. She wore hiking boots and carried a canvas satchel with books poking out. Her presence was grounded. Real. He talked about you constantly, she said. Showed me your work in California. Said he regretted letting you go. I studied her looking for signs of deception, but found only a quiet resilience. He showed me the Riverside plans. The original ones, she said, her voice catching. He was proud of that project. He called it his redemption. I nodded. It's going to be a fight. Then let's fight smart, she said. I'm an environmental planning professor. If you need proof to counter Langford's proposal, I've got numbers and models that'll make the council blink. I left that meeting not just with hope, but with a plan. But of course, hope invites resistance. The very next morning, Langford's car was waiting outside Blake Development. His assistant handed me a folder with a smug smile. An offer, he said. Inside was a buyout proposal for Riverbend Commons. 8 figures, fast cash, a shallow legacy. I didn't even blink. Tell Victor I'm not selling, I said. But if he wants to meet, I'll explain why his blueprint's about to burn. Let them come. I was no longer alone. The Fairhaven Town Council chamber smelled faintly of dust and old paper, like a room used more for ceremony than conflict. That changed the night I stepped up to the podium with my father's original Riverbend plans in one hand and Rachel's environmental projections in the other. People filled the seats. Small business owners, high school teachers, baristas, librarians. Many had watched my father build this town brick by brick. Others had only known the Elaine version of Blake Development, polished profit first, and increasingly detached. I laid it out plainly. Riverbend Commons was never meant to be a playground for the wealthy, I said. It was designed as a space for families, for local businesses, for sustainability. My father knew Fairhaven couldn't thrive without economic diversity. Behind me, a screen displayed the original site plans, green spaces, mixed-income housing, riverfront walking paths. Rachel's graphs followed air quality impacts, local business multipliers, housing affordability models. Mara sat near the front, nodding with quiet pride. Marjorie was beside her, arms crossed, daring anyone to challenge me. Then Langford stood. Gray suit, polished loafers, developer smugness turned up to 11. Cameron Blake, he said with a rehearsed smile. Impressive speech. But you've been gone. The town evolved. People want growth. Tax revenue, progress. Progress isn't condos no one here can afford, I countered. It's homes. It's jobs. It's keeping Fairhaven livable for the people who built it. Langford chuckled like I was a naive child. What people want are options. You're offering sentiment. I'm offering prosperity. But Whitney stood, all eyes turned. I grew up benefiting from privilege in this town, she said. But I also watched families get priced out. Businesses shuttered. Cameron's plan doesn't just preserve the past, it protects our future. Someone clapped. Then another. Then the whole room joined in. Elaine was conspicuously absent, but her allies weren't. They murmured among themselves as the council took notes, shuffled paperwork, looked shaken. Afterward, Councilwoman Denise Harper approached me. She was in her 60s, sharp and famously non-committal. That night, she wasn't. Blake Development lost its way, she said. But this is a course correction. The council didn't vote that night, but the tide had turned. Outside, the night air was sharp with fall's approach. Rachel joined me on the courthouse steps, flipping her scarf against the wind. "He'd be proud of you," she said softly. "Not just because you're protecting his work, because you're building something better than he had the courage to." I nodded. "It feels like we're just getting started." But just as I turned to leave, a sleek town car pulled up to the curb. The door opened, and out stepped Elaine. She didn't look at me as she walked past. But she didn't have to. We both knew this wasn't over. She wasn't the kind of woman to lose quietly. Still, for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel afraid of her. She could throw her money, her name, even her venom. But I had something she never would: the town's trust and my father's blueprint. Elaine called for a meeting 3 days later. Not a courtroom, not a boardroom. Her attorney's office, neutral turf with expensive rugs and crystal water pitchers that screamed control. I brought Rachel with me. She brought no one. Just herself in a tailored navy suit and a face painted with dignity and exhaustion. "I'll be direct," she said, barely waiting for the assistant to close the door. "I'm willing to withdraw all legal claims against Blake Legacy Holdings and the estate if you hand over Riverbend Commons." I didn't flinch. "That land was your father's most prized asset," she said. "He and I worked on those plans together for years. Don't pretend you're the only one who loved Fairhaven." "You didn't love Fairhaven," I replied evenly. "You wanted to repackage it for a profit." Elaine's voice sharpened. "I spent 2 decades preserving his reputation while you ran off to play Messiah in California." I pulled out my tablet and opened the video. My father's tired face filled the screen. "Elaine doesn't understand Riverbend," he said in the recording. "She's already meeting with Langford. I've started transferring the properties to Cam." Elaine's eyes flicked to the screen, and for a split second, just one, I saw it. Not rage, not bitterness, grief. She reached out and paused the video. "That wasn't the man I married," she whispered. "Not at the end. He was different. He was clear," I said. "And he was fair. You got the house, the investments, the comfort. But the company that was always meant for me." Silence filled the room like fog. Then she straightened her back, every inch the social commander I remembered. "Then we're done here." She stood, collected her bag, and walked out without another word. Rachel exhaled beside me. That felt anticlimactic. It was never about drama for her, I said. It was about winning. Once she knew she couldn't, she disengaged. Back at Blake Development, Marjorie met us with a quiet smile. She called the council, withdrew her name from the Riverbend zoning discussions, and just like that it was over. Later that week, Whitney stopped by my office. She was holding a cardboard box. "She left this in the attic," she said. "Said it was yours." Inside, childhood drawings. A baseball glove. My mother's recipe cards. And at the very bottom, a letter in my father's handwriting. "Cam, if this ever reaches you, it means she didn't win. I know you'll do right by this town. Just remember, the best builders don't just create structures. They build trust. They build community. They build legacies." I closed the box and leaned back, letting the weight of those words settle. Elaine left Fairhaven the following Monday. Jake followed weeks later, moving to Austin to explore hospitality ventures. No lawsuit ever came. And for the first time in years, the Blake name began to mean something again, something hopeful. But what surprised me most wasn't how it ended with Elaine. It was how it began with everyone else. Employees, neighbors, council members, people who saw my father's heart in the new plans and believed we could restore what mattered. And we weren't just rebuilding buildings. We were rebuilding belief. 1 year later, I stood on the observation deck overlooking Riverbend Commons, watching the late afternoon sun pour gold across the rooftops of buildings that hadn't even existed when I first came back. What had once been a stagnant patch of land was now alive, bustling with activity. The first wave of families had moved into the mixed-income housing units last month. Children played in the green spaces designed around the preserved maple trees. A cafe co-op run by 3 local women had opened by the waterfront promenade, and behind it all, nestled in the corner of the Riverwalk Park, was a bronze plaque. The Richard Blake Memorial Commons built for the community, preserved for generations. Franklin Ross, my dad's old mentor and business partner, leaned beside me on the railing. He still wore suits from a different decade and called me kid, but there was no mistaking the respect in his voice. "Your father would have been proud," he said. I nodded. I think he'd be surprised too. Not just by the outcome, but by how many people stayed and fought for it. Rachel had taken a position, as Director of Environmental Sustainability for Blake Legacy Holdings. She now lived 10 minutes away in a renovated Craftsman and biked to work. Her data and designs became the backbone of our long-term planning, especially the new green roof initiative that would launch next spring. Whitney had joined the team too, marketing of all things. She had a knack for storytelling, for reframing old reputations into new narratives. Sometimes I caught her staring at the old photographs on the hallway walls, my dad at the ribbon cutting of the original Blake Tower, our family at a harvest fair, long before things fell apart. And I saw the weight of what we'd all been through settle in her eyes. But she was trying. Even Jake, to my shock, had turned a corner. He opened a bistro in one of the Blake-owned retail spaces downtown. It wasn't glamorous, but it was good. The reviews were solid. He even showed up to work most days, sleeves rolled, apron stained. I'd taken to walking the Commons every Friday evening. Grace usually joined me. She was still running her architecture firm, but we were partners now in business and in life. "Have you decided what to do with the West Lot?" she asked one night, as we sat on a bench near the new community center. "Thinking of starting a small business incubator," I said. "For local creators, artisans. Give people a shot like Dad gave me." She squeezed my hand. "That sounds right." That night, as we walked home beneath string lights and a velvet sky, I finally understood what my father had meant when he said property is permanence. He wasn't talking about cement or square footage. He was talking about people, about putting down roots that others could grow from. At the edge of the Commons, a sculpture stood, a steel and glass installation with the words "Build Forward" etched at the base. It had been my mother's dream to pursue architecture before life, and caregiving sidelined her ambitions. A new scholarship in her name now funded young women entering the field. The first 3 recipients were already enrolled at state schools, eager, inspired, determined. And me, I no longer walked through Fairhaven like a ghost in my own story. I walked as a man who had learned that real inheritance wasn't measured in bank statements or board votes. It was measured in the people who stood beside you, the future you dared to shape, the roots you planted when it would have been easier to leave. My journey back to Fairhaven began with betrayal, silence, and resentment. But over time, it revealed something deeper. Legacy isn't what we're given. It's what we build, protect, and pass on. I came home to reclaim what was stolen, but I stayed to rebuild what had nearly been lost. Through old wounds and new allies, I honored my father's vision while forging one of my own. In doing so, I found not just my place, but my people. And more than anything, I learned that healing doesn't come from revenge. It comes from choosing to build forward one honest decision at a time. Now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to stand up for something that was rightfully yours against the people you once called family, or faced a moment where justice and healing stood at opposite ends? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. Like this story, hit that like button, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to believe that legacies can be rewritten. And remember, sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is come home.